Hello and welcome to the Too Much Time on Our Hands podcast. If you're joining us in YouTube land, hello streamers, how are you? Everyone in the room, give a wave to all of our YouTube streamers. You might have noticed there's a few more faces than normal here right now, and that's because we are joined by some very qualified people. As you probably saw on the intro graphics or have seen all over our social media feeds, this week's podcast is the coronavirus podcast, which is why we have employed the services. Duncan, in a new guise, as Dr. Duncan. He is a PhD. His wife, Emma, is also here. She has a PhD as well. She is Dr. Duncan's wife. Dr. B.
I am Dr. Bailey.
Dr. B, which I really like. So we've got Dr. Dunk, we've got Dr. B, and we've also got, I'm pointing down because he's down below, but he's probably somewhere else, but we've got Matt with us as well, Matthew Russell, Dr. R, Dr. Russell? What's your sort of gangster name, Matthew? What are we going to go for?
Oh, Dr. Matt, I think.
Dr. Matt. Okay. So we've got Dr.
Sounds
Dunk.
very children's TV so far.
Yeah. Come and have a
Dr.
chat with Dr. Matt. Yeah. So we've got Dr. Dunk, we've got Dr. B, and we've got Dr. Matt. We've also got the other members of the Awesome Foursome. We've got Russ. Hello, Russ. We got Dan. Hello, Dan.
I'm going to get it in now before I know this is going to be an opinion-based thing. I'm against it.
Bold. It's a bold take. Let's see how that goes down with the audience.
Let's see how it works out.
Yeah.
Have we lost any
I'm
streamers?
being a little overqualified, over sort of, achieved here. I would like it pointed out that I've got 1/3 of a degree in geography and a gold touring certificate.
Absolutely, and those are the most important things that you have. So that's great. So yeah, with no further ado, look, I'm going to hand it over to Duncan. These people are here to talk to us about their take on the current coronavirus outbreak. So I'm going to hand over to Duncan, whose idea this all was.
Whose fault this all was?
Actually, I thought it was Matt's idea.
This is Matt's baby.
I'm going to hand over to Duncan because this was Matt's idea.
Right, yeah. So, Duncan, how do we fix this thing?
Quick,
elevator pitch. 30 seconds. How do we fix it? Come on.
It's a yes or no answer. How do we
keep it top line? Keep it top line.
Gaffer tape and toothpaste.
Wait. There you go. You heard it here first on the Too Much Time on Our Hands podcast.
Right. Social, yeah.
Better for you than injecting bleach.
I want to find out about that later. Okay.
So that's obviously one of the symptoms.
We've got to get Duncan a laptop stand.
Yeah. Because obviously this is.
You think this is bad? You should see how it goes when he's talking about something sexy.
All right, come on, guys. The wheels. Let's keep the wheels on, Duncan.
Yeah. Right.
Go.
So it turns out we know some very clever people. I'm married to one of them, though the fact that she married me doesn't necessarily mean that she's very clever. But
despite appearances and sounds and everything, you are also one of those very clever people.
Well, apparently so, but after this, we will doubt that. So it turns out Dan knows quite a lot of clever people. And he also gets 2 hellish rebukes this session, so use it wisely.
I'm going to be the voice of the everyman, I think, in this. I've got some questions that I think there's a lot of people need to know the answer to.
And Dan's got a lot.
How do you spell coronavirus?
Spelling bee.
I've got some very important questions that need answers. Yeah. I've got one very important. No, carry on. Sorry, Duncan.
So now this is a story all about how our lives were turned upside down, and I'd like to take this hour or so, to tell you about the disease called SARS-CoV-2. Yeah, because in the beginning, it was called SARS-CoV-2. It wasn't COVID-19 until late February. So there were various ways I thought we could do this. I kind of thought we could do it as a choose your own adventure. And I started writing it as such, but then it became really complicated. However, I do think there is we've been in this whole situation since January. It is a very 2020 thing. And there's been a lot of information coming out, a lot of things happened over a long period of time, and I thought we would try and sort of condense some of it as a bit of a summary. So we are going to give our takes. It is going to be a matter of opinion, though we will be quoting some research or like our own experiences. Don't take it as like I want to stress we're not experts, but we do sort of know how to interpret some of this stuff, or at least some of the methods used and kind of what everything is meant to represent. So
don't worry too much about the disclaimer. If anyone's taking their health advice from a pop culture podcast, then they're kind of they're not going to be contributing to the gene pool much longer anyway, so I wouldn't worry about it.
I think what would be really useful, actually, just to start this, where you said it was a matter of opinion. Genuinely, I don't know what your PhDs are in. So even when we were in the green room, because we have a green room, we were talking about all this, what we were going to talk about, but we didn't actually touch on your PhD. So if we could just do a quick kind of 30-second PhD explanation, just to kind of set the scene, that'd be really helpful for me.
Well, I will therefore introduce my wife, Dr. B. My wife. You're my wife now.
A bit awkward because on the stream I'm literally in between you two. I'll try not to.
Oh, damn it.
As always. So my background is I have a PhD in clinical neuroscience. Basically, it just means I have a PhD in stuff to do with stroke and the basic science behind different types of stroke. I also have a bit of background in cardiovascular disease, bioengineering, and neuroscience in general. So that's where I'm coming from. I teach anatomy as well. So I can give you an anatomical kind of overview. I can give you a little bit of clinical stuff. And yeah, I can't do any of the biochemistry. I will leave that to Dr. Russell.
That's a good next
segue. She's better at this than we are.
Very well done.
Everyone else has already jumped to that conclusion.
There's a slot opening up.
So I spend most of my time playing with machines for which weigh molecules, and I use that machine to work out how the machinery inside the smallest bit of living organism, which is the cell, how that is changing when you change the conditions you put that cell in. So that's what I do, which is quite different from viruses, but people who work on that kind of thing are often the people that I'm collaborating with or who my colleagues are collaborating with. So a lot of chat about that kind of thing through them. And I've been taking an interest, obviously, in this thing that's happened to us over the last 6 months. So I'm happy to chat about my thoughts about it.
Yeah, it must be very weird watching what is effectively a global experiment sort of unfold in real time, but with no control or safety or anything that you would ideally like in place.
No, and it's also knowing about the uncertainties around early research. So you can see the research coming out, but because we work in it and we talk with people who work in research all the time, and we know that when you do an experiment, first time it doesn't even do what you thought, you don't even follow the instructions right, and then later you have another go and the data doesn't make any sense, and you have another go. And we know that's how it works, and yet you've got this emergency where you need to get information really fast. So we know there are people out there like us working really hard to get the information and getting it out into the papers or into the radio or the television or whatever to let people know what's going on. But not how little trust you should have in them, but just the process is so tricky that you have to.
Yeah, just to kind of interject there as well. Like, you don't just put your scientific results out and that's it. Like, they go through something called peer review, which means that usually they go through other scientists to sort of pick at it and go, have they done this right? And also some of them you have to actually prove you can repeat the experiment you did as well before you can publish it. So it's almost like you have to do it twice, but a different lab repeats your experiment to see whether or not they can get the same result as well.
So it wasn't just something weird about the conditions it was in or something you didn't actually take into account.
Yeah. So it's really not as simple maybe as people think it is, just to put scientific data out there.
I've always thought it was quite easy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, this isn't the sort of thing where Captain Kirk can just yell at you, you've only got 6 hours to create a vaccine and deploy it to 7 billion people. It's probably a bit more tricky than that. But
I love that episode.
There does seem to have been a lot of it's sort of taken people aback just how long it's going to take And even if it's going to be possible to create any sort of effective vaccine or cure for this, and
Well,
I think when that was being discussed, it was at a point when people needed some good news, and it was not good news.
Well, maybe that's
Apparently
because
Russia has
there
sorted
is.
it out.
Well, yeah, of course, because
I think that was pretty much the response of the whole scientific community everywhere, wasn't it? Kind of a.
It was probably like, yeah. But though you like both Matt and no, talking to Emma earlier about it, that this is been an unprecedented time for kind of scientific collaboration, because the WHO, the World Health Organization, not the band, and because we know what kind of research Pete Townsend does.
Okay, we were talking earlier about things we definitely that's up there. He was writing a book, Duncan. Okay,
I said research.
Do you know what? I had an innocent Roger Daltrey joke going through my head there, and you had to go and just.
I just said research.
Just because you got a Tumblr account doesn't mean anything, okay?
Incidentally, if someone's got their mobile phone near the microphone, for the sake of the streamers,
is it me?
God, man, think
when
of the
somebody
streamers.
thinks it's normally Dan.
It's me. Yeah. Is that better?
It stopped.
Hang on. Yes. No.
Cool. Sorry, it was quite far away, but.
So the WHO set up this trial called the Solidarity Trial, and it is bringing like researchers from across the world and especially universities together, and the idea is that they all share data, they streamline like the clinical trials, all the tests that need to go. I think, I mean, I haven't even said what my PhD in, but that doesn't matter because we're talking about like clinical trials, and I don't think anyone really understands why some drugs were being tested first, not bleach, because that would not work.
I have it on pretty good authority that it does, though.
It kills everything.
I mean, he's the president of the United States.
To be fair to him,
he has a surgeon
completely accurate
general
in saying that it would destroy the virus.
It does, but it would also destroy you. So,
if you're going to get specific and pedantic about it,
I think that's a small price to pay to wipe this virus out, right?
I have my first question. Same person.
If you turn somebody inside out to expose their insides to light, then they're not going to be too badly affected.
Yeah. How can we do that? That's what I want to know.
What, turn someone inside out?
I'm waiting. Yeah.
You need the teleporter from the fly.
So with Trump, I thought one of the things was actually that was almost how you start thinking about a scientific problem. Is you say, oh well, there's this thing that might work. How could we get that bit of that thing with that thing so it does its job there? You start with that, and then
but maybe one or two
Just
more steps before telling everyone to start doing it.
I love the fact that Donald Trump starts most sentences. You can always imagine him like in the Oval Office, kind of saying, hypothetically, if we, did this, would that work? And I imagine it's kind of like, hypothetically, if we just let Russia off everything that they have actually done. I mean, just hypothetically, if we injected bleach into people's veins, just hypothetically, like, what's the worst that would happen? And then let's zero-based budget up from there.
So I don't know why I'm defending, but so there is a drug actually that I'm sure there's a technique that's been developed for skin cancer where the idea is you inject a drug into somebody's body and then that is harmless in the form in which you inject into the body, and then you shine a laser onto the skin cancer, the area of skin cancer. It's laser. So you are pumping light in someone's body. It's just the reason why you choose skin cancer, not the lungs, is because it's close to the surface. You point the laser at that, and it happens that the laser breaks the drug that's harmless in the rest of your body into a a deadly toxin, but just where you want to kill some tissue. So that's a bit like bleach. It would kill anything.
That's clearly what he was on about then, isn't it?
It's a good illustration of the idea of a little knowledge being a dangerous thing.
But you put it together the right way, and you've got something useful.
I thought this might be quite a good time, therefore, to actually go through what the process of a clinical trial, various stages of a clinical trial, and why it will take a long time. Also, why maybe they started looking at pre-existing drugs, not just bleach.
Not bleach
Okay.
at all.
Oh, so I'm going to hand over to Emma because Emma knows it. I'm going to point that way because she's over there to me, but she might be that way on the screen.
Okay.
Why do you all keep trying to do this? You don't know where each other are.
I do.
If
She's
that's the
over
proper way to
there.
construct that sentence.
It doesn't know where I am.
But I'm in the middle. You can't point to her without going like, okay, you point your arm, and what I'll have to do is like bring mine in across. Like
That way
you've
or
got a
that
weird
way?
long
I
one.
don't know. Anyway,
There's 3 people on this call with PhDs, and this is the crazy shit that we're
Yeah.
going to be talking
Yeah.
about. Well done,
it's about
guys.
science, well, Dan. Dan, this is why it takes so long to get a vaccine out.
Ah,
So clinical trials
Shit Zoom
specifically
calls.
for drugs
Yeah.
for human use obviously
Yeah.
are a fairly convoluted process. So
Yes.
kind of top line, what are the steps that in a non-apocalyptic scenario you'd go through to get something from, a computer model to a drug that is able to be prescribed?
Well, let's put it in terms of a vaccine first, because a drug is different from a vaccine, right?
Okay,
They're like
sure it
completely
is.
different kind of mechanisms. But a vaccine, I suppose, like any clinical trial involving human subjects, you're looking at a timeline of about 3 to 4 years to finish most of that clinical trial. Now, the majority of the first year or two is actually a lot of ethics applications and going through regulatory bodies. It takes ages to usually push paperwork through these things, like years. You can come up with the idea and then you sit around waiting for at least a year, 2 years.
And this is
Even
where you
if you-
get told that you're not allowed to take people's arms off and swap them
Yeah.
around or deprive people of light for 6
Yeah.
months.
Someone has to check what you're doing is actually ethically, moral. So that's the first bit. And
They
then,
saved a lot of time by waiving quite a lot of that, haven't they? That seems to be.
yeah, they have, yeah.
It's really good paperwork if you decide you want.
So for this one, basically all of that has gone out the window because they're like, yeah, this is serious. This has to happen now. Whereas most people's like, oh, I think this might work. Drug. Yeah, that's
Sure,
that's
that
a
won't lead
couple
to
of
any
years.
problems 10 years down the line.
Yeah. So anyway, for a vaccine, what they do is once the vaccine has actually been created, obviously that's the first bit. Matt can probably tell you more about the timeline for that than me, but usually that takes, I don't even know, because it depends on the starting point. I suppose with this, they might have had some kind of starting point because they've had.
Well, I don't know about all of them, but all the strategies that are being proposed. But the Oxford group have started with their work on the similar virus that broke out in the Middle East a couple of years ago that was called MERS-CoV, which is closely related. So fingers crossed they just swapped some bits out, didn't they?
Yeah.
I think.
So that will speed up the initial process. If you've got something you can work with that was similar in the first place, obviously that's going to help. Once they've created this vaccine, what happens is that small groups of people, usually healthy people, will receive the vaccine just to make sure that it doesn't immediately kill anyone when you inject them with it.
Always good to know.
Usually with vaccines it doesn't happen, but they have to do that. So that's what we call a phase 1 clinical trial. Now in phase 2, that study is extended to include people who are more representative of the target population for the vaccine. So in this case, you're probably looking at giving it to over 50s, at least to kind of just to make sure that they're okay, because over 50s have more what we call comorbidities, i.e. they've got underlying conditions. So it's just to make sure that vaccine is safe in those people. And then phase 3 for a vaccine is where the vaccine is given to thousands and thousands of people. And that's to test how efficient the vaccine is. So it'll be developed at a certain dose. But you'll remember probably from your childhood that some vaccines you need to receive them twice. Some vaccines you only need once. They have to refine all of that kind of stuff as well. Now, because this is a virus, it might end up actually being something like the flu jab, where they have to tweak it every year as well. Do you mean there's all kinds of things. So they enter this phase 3 clinical trial. They're testing it for efficacy and safety.
So why does the flu jab have to get tweaked? Is that because the flu virus is changing year on year?
Yeah, the flu virus mutate. Again, I don't know whether Matt wants to come in on this, but yeah, the flu virus kind of mutates slightly every year.
As undesigned, but the flu virus's strategy is to change all the time to try and get, or rather, the viruses that survive are those viruses that have mutated and are not recognized by the immune system that's been sort of primed to detect flu by a previous infection.
Sneaky
Which is why you get it
bastards.
over and over again. So coronaviruses in general, I believe, they have a much longer genome, and it's much more risky for them to suffer a mutation because that can mean that it's a non-functioning virus. So most mutations of coronaviruses actually result in that new mutant not spreading.
Okay. So the more complex it is, the riskier a mutation is.
Yes, and actually, so COVID also has lots of organisms have a little mechanism inside them for checking whether the copying is correct and chopping out mistakes. And COVID actually, presumably because it needs it, has one of those. So it has its own inbuilt mechanism to reduce the rate at which it mutates, which is handy for us because you might hope that it will be more stable, this thing.
Mm-hmm.
That said, in the wild, clearly it is mutating. They're finding different strains with slightly different properties. So that's not necessarily foolproof. And
sorry, just to interject here, but do they exhibit the same sort of it's risky to mutate attribute? These other strains.
I don't know that. There is a thought that respiratory viruses tend to become less lethal over time because it's in their interest to do that. So
there was quite a cool study, well, maybe not cool, right, interesting one, so we know that in 2003 there was the original SARS, what gets called SARS-CoV-1, or as I like to call it, COVID Origins. If it was a film, it would be after, we'd be talking about it after COVID-19.
The prequel.
The prequels.
Yeah.
No, okay.
Still better than Prometheus. Yeah.
See, we don't want to get into this.
I'd probably watch Prometheus again.
I like Prometheus.
All right. Wouldn't do this again.
Alien Covenant. Anyway,
yeah,
I was trying to keep it more culturally relevant. Anyway, but what they found was that COVID-19 is more closely related to BAT-CoV or bat COVID. So the COVID coronavirus from bats. So is this technically Batman-CoV?
Mm-hmm.
Well, man-bat-CoV, probably.
Man-bat-CoV.
I had a question, but you've completely drilled it from my brain.
So, when it jumps, so obviously jumping from an animal to humans means that it obviously does still mutate when it's in the new host.
Is this referred to as the species barrier?
Yeah, anything that jumps from animal to human is known as a zoonosis, and quite a few diseases. So my PhD, though it technically was in zoology, was actually in parasitology. So I studied those parasites of fish. Amazingly, it does mean you have to sort of cover infectious diseases generally, and you become one of those weird people who has a weird fascination for dangerous infectious diseases.
Yeah, become that, sure.
Yeah, I just become that. You know it. So zoonoses are some of the most dangerous diseases in the world. Lyme disease. Everyone's probably heard of Lyme's disease. You get it from ticks, from deer.
Deer ticks,
yeah.
So they're more dangerous because you've got so many more infection vectors. If it could be coming at you from all sorts of different animals.
Often it's just you're the not target host, and for some reason, if it takes hold, it can just you just don't have any kind of response because it doesn't really suit the illness if the host dies too quickly, because it means it can't pass it on. There's no cognitive action in the disease. It's the way it works. It's like if you can't transmit, then you don't reproduce, and therefore you die out. So you don't want that kind of break in that. And so this is there must have been some mutation from it jumping from the bat, not the pangolin as previously reported, but more similar from the bat, and then it's just taken hold in the in the human, and that's where we are, I suppose. Anyway, clinical
You
trials.
end up with, so over time, the two, when you've got the virus in its normal host, the two are sort of engaged in an arms war with each other. The host trying to live longer once it's get it, or survive with it completely, and the virus trying to use it to reproduce itself and get into another host. So that can be going on for, you know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of years. And then once it jumps, it's got a whole set of, the virus has got a whole set of techniques for dealing with this one host. And then it comes into a human, and some of those techniques work better on us and some of them work less well. But the important thing is we've not had that relationship with that virus for that time. So we have no immunity to it because we've not been exposed to it, and so on, and because it's not just generally around. And then the things that it does even are not things that when our bodies are necessarily sort of primed to deal with. So there's this moment of extreme danger where either the humans get much sicker than normal, or the virus fails completely, which is what actually usually happens because we're all being exposed to these things all the time. So most of the time, when someone is infected with a virus, either they don't even from another animal, they don't notice, or they don't get sick, or if they do get sick, they still don't pass it on because the virus doesn't have the attributes to get from person to person. But we got eventually you get unlucky just because this is happening so frequently that eventually one of the bullets hits a sweet spot.
Can I ask a quick question here then?
Trouble.
So Duncan said that we've been dealing with this since January. So I am one of many people that I've spoken to over the last 6 months or so who have said, oh, bloody hell, you know, like in February, I got this chest infection and cold and headache and stuff like that. I was floored for a week. Like, in terms of likelihood that people have suffered from COVID without knowing, you know, without any testing, like it's unlikely that I'm going to find out whether or not that was COVID-19 that I was suffering from, you know, because I was wiped out, like completely wiped out off the face of the earth. It felt awful. And then my missus got it, and then Vinny got the same thing. How many of us are walking around with immunity now? Do we know this? Is there even any sort of possible way of projecting that at this point?
I don't know exactly. So I can tell you part of the problem. So so we can never know how many people had it unless we detected it. So when someone gets the virus immediately, and you go to those test centers and you have a thing stuck up your nose, and they take that material away to test it. What they're looking for is the genetic sequence in the virus as it's produced inside you. So that's whilst the infection's happening and the virus is getting into your cells, and what a virus does, it turns your cells into machines for making more virus, and then your cells break open and the virus comes out, and then it floods out of you into the environment around you. And it's, you know, the point of that is then that the next host picks it up and gets ill. So once that's happening, you can get some of those bits of virus in your test tube and go and have a look and see if you can find the DNA for the virus in your test tube. And if it's there, then the person had the virus. And if it's not there, then they were sick with something else. But once you get better, the virus isn't being produced anymore, and that technique doesn't work. So all you can do is look for the sort of echo in the immune system that it would try to defend itself against this virus. And you can go and find those things. They're called antibodies. So that's what you hope would be the things that would prime your body to attack the virus if it saw it again. But my understanding is the tests designed to detect those things called antibodies don't work very well. So it's very hard to go into the population and test lots and lots of people and see whether they've had it or not. So we don't know. And we don't know if you're not testing positive on these antibody tests, maybe you're not immune. So this is a problem. This relates to the vaccine as well. So we don't know if you actually have long-term immunity from being sick with it. And we don't know if a vaccine will confer long-term immunity, whether or not the virus does.
I've seen a lot of people, assuming that people have been talking about getting like immunity certificates and things like that. That will mean you can go out into the world and start acting like normal. But that does seem like a bit of, if this is a flu-like virus, nobody gets immune from flu. So is that just
Yeah.
wishful thinking?
There is, so antibodies also, like the effectiveness of a vaccine. Sorry, unless you wanted to come in.
Mm.
There is always the fact that the antibodies fade over time, and the length of time an antibody stays in, in your system varies, but they do fade over time, and the ability to then produce them again or recognize the cause that then makes your body create those antibodies again also can change over time, which is related to the disease.
So you might get ill,
taking.
produce antibodies, get better, and then that sort of shuts down relatively quickly compared to some other diseases. You don't have them hanging around.
Yeah, they don't necessarily stay in the body as long. I think with COVID there is some indication they do fade relatively quickly, I think, but it's not really a clear picture.
So I've seen where you can buy for about 15 quid an online antibody test, and if it comes back negative, they will send you a little card that says "I'm immune to coronavirus." That would be
fills me
on
with
the
horror.
bollocks side of the scale then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That fills me with horror.
It's also
I won't get it then.
It's interesting that how it plays with how people might behave as well. So that's one of the interesting things about COVID, I think, is the way people respond to it. And one of the things that you could imagine happening with a immunity certificate is suddenly, if you go and get yourself COVID, then you get a certificate which sets you free. So you can imagine people wanting to go to COVID parties, particularly young people who we know are less likely to get sick, who want to get the disease, then get the antibodies, then get the certificate. But if you did that, then you could have people dying from their desire to get this virus. So you have to think very carefully about how you put together.
There's been quite a lot of that sort of thing. Unfortunately, we don't have a tame behavioural scientist to hand, so we are going to have to wing any of this sort of things. But I mean, there was, people in the government were talking about how they were reluctant to mandate face masks because it would give people a false sense of confidence, which
even though
I'm not 100% sure
back in hang on, I've got this somewhere. I think back in mid-February, even there's something like mid-February. We'll just go with that. They were talking about advising people on how to stay safe and the guidance for proper PPE and even just wearing face masks. It was like maybe it was late February, but anyway, so the WHO were advising kind of quite early on about maybe wear face masks.
I think it's the opposite though with face masks. I think the face masks remind you that this isn't normal. Like
that's
there
exactly
is
how
something
I feel
that's
that
there
like
is something actually out there.
Distancing in shops and stuff, it's so easy to forget, or like you just you want to grab the thing, somebody's there, you nip in with them. But if you're wearing a mask, it does make you think a bit more. Hopefully,
I can say that social distancing in shops is very difficult for some people.
So I think there might have been a product early on that was a mask with "if you can read this, you're too close" written on it, that got taken out for being sort of flippant or whatever. But I think that's brilliant. I want everyone around me to be wearing that, so I keep remembering to.
As a motorcycle rider, I can confidently say that on the road, people find it very difficult to stay further than a meter from my back tire. So if they are willing to be that close to me, which might involve them in a road accident, where if my bike hits their car from a meter away, not much is going to happen at 30 miles an hour. They're going to get a dent. You hit my back tire from a meter away at 35 miles an hour, you're probably going to kill me. And I'm probably going to go under your car, and so's my bike. Like, if that's the behavior that you see on the roads, when someone walks into a shop, which just feels like an innocent place, it never happens. I was wearing a face mask in the range down in Apsley. With my trolley, I was buying storage boxes for all this shit around me. And there was a guy literally standing a foot from the back of my neck. I could feel his breath through his mask on the back of my neck. And I turned around to about this way and I said, "You are too close to me." And he just went, "Well, you're 2 meters from the guy in front." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I'm the guy in front of you. Step back." It's insane.
I can say from personal experience that going into a shop, that people do tend to ignore the bright yellow lines or bright yellow tape that's been put on a lot of the shop floors, signage everywhere saying stay 2 meters apart. I've seen people go up to people in shops and with their masks up, and to talk, they've pulled the mask down and go, "Excuse me, can you tell me where so-and-so is?" It's like, we can hear you. The person can hear you through the mask. Like, you don't need to put the mask down. And you see, like, I feel bad for shop assistants that have people just come up to you like here and just like ask questions, that some of them not wearing masks. Some of them, they're exempt from wearing masks, but even if you're exempt from wearing masks, I get the feeling you'd probably be practicing the social distancing side of things anyway. Some shops have screens, and I've seen people talk round the screens because they don't like talking through this hole. Yeah, rather than like talking.
I was in a shop the other day, and they had those screens, and they put the screens in front of the till, as in the unit.
Yeah,
and the shop assistant was not behind it. It's like they were protecting the physical till from coronavirus, but not the people.
So it's yeah.
I don't understand the psychology behind
that. No. So I've seen some crazy stuff. I saw recently 2 people in a shop walking around. One of them had a face mask around their chin, and the other one had no face mask at all. Just browsing through stock, picking things up whilst eating a giant bag of crisps.
Classy.
It's horrible.
So yes. I mean, I know.
Yeah, back on track. Sorry.
I was going to say, I know we don't want to get sort of too far down this, but I think the fundamental problem is that every time anyone expresses the fact that this virus has the symptoms of a flu, there are many of us who kind of go, "Well, I've had flu before, and it was bloody awful, but I was okay afterwards." The thing that confuses me almost at every turn is, why are we allowed to go around calling this a flu-like virus if the only similarity it has is that it basically is transmitted in the same kind of ways and presents with the same kind of symptoms, but actually is a much more lethal version of it? Why are we calling it flu-like? Why aren't we actually, literally calling it, almost, this is the most significant viral outbreak since the Black Death, in terms of the impact it could have on the world?
Well,
and being over dramatic about it. I mean, to bring the message home.
You're not being over dramatic. I mean, for us and Northern Europe, it is certainly the worst pandemic since 1918.
Sorry, Duncan. I think you'll find that was 1917. My source told me that again. The president of the United States. I think he knows a thing or two about this.
Was this Spanish flu?
Yeah.
Which is actually should have been
but
North
back when
American
we were allowed
flu.
to call illnesses racist names.
Yeah. In fact, it wasn't even Spanish.
What's the proper name?
Well, there wasn't really
H1N1.
It was called basically whatever country you don't like's flu, depending on where you are. We called it Spanish flu. They didn't call it that in Spain.
It was apparently, they thought it came from Spain, but it didn't. It actually came from Kansas. A pig farm in Kansas, H1N1, the original H1N1, which caused the influenza. I think they call it flu-like because the symptoms are a temperature, a fever, a persistent cough, which, a lot of flus do. And it's very funny. The persistent cough is actually, interestingly, you also get the loss of sense of taste and smell in a lot of cases, and it's the sniffle and the sneezing. So I think it's because aspects of the symptoms are similar to flu, but there is nothing else really similar to it.
So this is not a flu strain at all.
No,
It just gives
influenza.
you flu-like symptoms, which a lot of illnesses do, because making people cough and sneeze and splutter is a good way of getting yourself into another host.
Yeah, influenza is a totally different kettle of virus.
So are we free of original COVID?
No, we're probably not that far off. So the beginning of the story technically happens we know it happens in China. Now, like a lot of, I remember when I was at uni doing, it was marine biology, but I did like love my infectious diseases. And one of the things that they kind of put home was they were thinking that there would be they were expecting another pandemic of some kind, and there would be that animal jump. And friends in this other WhatsApp group that we started about following this apocalypse did also say they were speaking to infectious disease specialists, and they kind of expected something to happen. Generally the thought was it was going to either arise in Africa or it was going to arise in the Far East, specifically China, where there's a lot of human-animal contact. And that is exactly what happened. So it was traced back to a fresh meat market, seafood and fresh meat market in Wuhan in the Hubei province, and it was originally picked up by the WHO China office on the 31st of December, and by I think the 12th of January, they had actually identified that this was a new strain of coronavirus. But it was actually a doctor that who had worked on the original SARS, the original COVID origins, back in 2003, who realized that the symptoms of this cough, of the pneumonia, because it was actually diagnosed more as pneumonia, it looked like similar symptoms as they saw in 2003. And that is when it kind of started looking more at what this virus was, using some of the genetic techniques that Matt's kind of alluded to. Does this relate to the virus? Yeah, it relates to influenza, but the kind of differences, there are lots of differences, because flu affects the vulnerable, but it affects young people as much, if not more, than people our age. But what we see with SARS, with COVID-19, is that there is quite a distinct age gradient. In fact, we saw it with SARS, but SARS didn't transmit as well. And so though it was actually higher death rate, because it didn't transmit, you could control it with lockdown measures. The same with MERS-CoV, the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. Again, it's really deadly, but it doesn't transmit very well. So it can be controlled by these lockdowns, by social distancing. You can actually eradicate it through these control measures. COVID-19, not so much. There are, we can go into, if you want, we can go into why, like people like, we've all got family members who've had to shield because they are vulnerable, because they've got respiratory issue, pre-existing, as Emma called them, comorbidities, but the existing respiratory issues, or like heart disease, and there's the age relatedness. And we can go into that if you want, if people are interested, why some people are more susceptible or at risk. Maybe susceptibility isn't the right term, because it turns out everyone's nearly equally susceptible, but it's more in terms of being vulnerable to it.
Yeah,
if you want,
like what is the difference between this and the other SARS outbreaks that we've had, or coronavirus outbreaks that we have? What makes this one so different? Is it that increased infection rate that is so much more likely to jump from host to host?
Isn't that? I'm looking back at Duncan, because that's transmission. I
mean,
mean, it's more.
So this is not my area of expertise, but this is my sort of understanding.
It seems our internet is dodgy.
Compared to the rest of us, you are all experts on everything, so don't worry about it.
So you've got. I think it's interesting to think about a sort of sweet spot for a disease like this, where if it's really lethal, then people die really fast and they don't give it to many people.
So is that the sort of bracket that something like Ebola would fit into?
Mm-hmm.
So Ebola's really kills people really fast. It's got
but it burns out. It's not going to sweep around the planet.
MERS, which was also a coronavirus, that also was had a much higher mortality rate. So that was that seemed to burn itself out faster. And then
One of the
so
key
obviously
things actually is that what's
Sorry, go on.
sorry, I think we've got slight internet
That's right,
issues.
we can hear you, Duncan. Go for it.
We can hear you.
I didn't right. So what it turns out is like the original COVID and MERS-CoV, and even influenza to some extent, they all sit in, the term is the lower respiratory tract, and where COVID-19 really excels is that it has a high viral load, so there's lots of virus in the upper respiratory tract, which turns out to be, now I'm going to look at Emma, say, and she'll hopefully nod and go, yes, upper respiratory tract is your nose. And so it reproduces pretty heavily in like
I've
the
got a
upper
nose.
throat. You've got a nose, Dan. You have.
Yeah.
I mean, I could have guessed that of the respiratory bits
Yeah.
called upper, your nose would
Yeah.
probably be one of them.
Everything like above your windpipe, basically.
Mhm.
is
Oh, hang on,
upper
but
respiratory.
But that is
then
actually
you're-
quite a complex set of apparatus, isn't it?
Yeah.
But then your ear, your ear, your nose, and your throat are all connected as well. So can you? I mean, can you also get ear infections?
Is your ear
Wow.
higher than your nose?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the issue there, there's a couple of issues there. The anatomical issue there is that basically you only really get movement from through a tiny, tiny, tiny little tube between your ear and your nose. And that tube and your ear, as far as I know, do not express the receptors that COVID binds to.
So you cannot get it through the ear.
So in theory, you cannot get COVID through your ear. No,
But you can get it through. Is it true you can get it through your eyeball?
not that I'm aware of.
I definitely heard that somewhere.
Did
I'd
you?
heard that
Was
as
that
well.
Donald Trump, Ross?
I
Was
don't
that
know.
Donald
This is
Trump?
the point now where
My sources say.
it could be.
I hadn't heard that one.
Hmm.
I mean, I
Even
sincerely
if you-
hope that's not true because it's disgusting.
So
Yeah.
it's a quick question. That means I can carry on licking Russ's ears and eyes. Cool.
Yeah.
I've got not his nose.
No,
Important.
don't lick his nose.
Just the outside.
I mean, preferably don't lick his face in general,
Yeah,
Dan.
we've been through this.
Oh,
He has to have something.
You know. And if you've got a face mask on, that's going to be harder anyway. Let's face it.
well, yeah. We get like a double face mask that covers both of our faces, so we can
Like
just.
a couple's
This
face.
has got gross. I'm sorry. I'm gonna shut up.
Yeah, I was going to say this is going to be one of the weirdest bubbles that we've got, right? I mean,
I'm
So it's
sorry.
probably got about sort of like 10 or 15 minutes left before everyone falls into catatonia. So one thing I would like to ask the scientists in the
band.
room is, what do you think the single biggest governmental fuck up from the UK government has been? Feel free not to disparage any bodies that you're hoping for funding from anytime soon.
They didn't lock down quick enough.
Oh, and when they did, it was well, I mean, if you'd fancy not going to the pub, that'd be great. It wasn't very decisive, was it?
Basically, everyone within a university setting was going, "Why are we still at work?"
Yeah.
Well, I can
Except-
remember that last week at work.
Mm.
Everyone was basically saying, "I don't think we should be here." A lot of people
Yeah.
weren't there. People,
Yeah.
it was the sort of, I don't really want to be here, but I don't feel like I could just unilaterally decide that I'm not going to be.
It must be a hard decision to make, though, to absolutely shut down your economy.
Hmm.
Like almost all the time. Do you remember when we used to talk about how important it was to have growth and have 1 or 2%, and now we've managed to drop 25 or 30% or whatever in the last couple of months. So to actually be
but
the person
that
in
is-
charge.
that is the result now, though, of a self-imposed recession. People are talking about this recession in quite dark terms, but actually, it's absolutely the right thing to do. Right
Oh, yeah,
now
yeah,
to
but-
actually manage our way
But
out.
being the person to decide to do
Oh, yeah,
that for the country.
I'm not saying it was an easy decision,
No.
but it's
And I
like
guess that
it
and the worry
feels
is
like they
with
didn't
things like-
actually take the decision. They sort of made a lot of mutterings about locking down and seeing what other countries are doing, and then they sort of said, "Oh, you probably shouldn't go out on the lash," and then the Prime Minister's father was in the pub that evening, and basically
then-
people took the decision to stay at home themselves, and when enough
Yeah.
of them were doing that, then Boris went
Yeah.
on telly saying you must stay at home.
And then he said, "We'll give it a few days, and then we're closing the pubs." So that Friday, I seem to remember everyone went to the pub which is like the
I think
dumbest thing in the
I
world.
think
It's
that was
just
inevitable. It's like when they banned drinking on the tube.
it's just well, everyone just got hammered on the tube.
I've got to say this whole thing represented a massive shift for me. I look, I know personal stuff is I don't know, it seems a bit self-involved, ironically, but for me, sitting there in front of that television and watching Boris do his what will probably go down in infamy now, stay at home, protect the NHS. Don't
drive to Durham.
Don't drive to Durham. Unless
you need your eyes tested.
Eyes testing. Yeah.
But
take that question off.
For me, when you watch films like the King's Speech and stuff, and you see people crowded around the wireless listening to the King's Speech, that we are now at war. It felt almost like that kind of once in a generation moment where everyone was watching telly that night.
I think that's what he wanted.
And I had to turn to my son with my wife, who literally started school in the September, has had the weirdest first year of school, and say to him, "You were going to go back and see your friends. Now we don't know how long, but you're staying at home with us now, and we're all going to stay here, and we can't go out." And trying to explain that to a 5-year-old who is an only child, so loves going to school and mixing with other children. You're not going to see anyone for a while, and we can't go and see grandma and granddad, and all that sort of stuff. It's incredibly strange. And then even in this whole situation, I think I've mentioned it on the pod before, my grandmother died in hospital towards the beginning of April. Of course, we weren't allowed to go to the funeral, still haven't had a funeral. My mum and dad went to a crematorium where she was, cremated and stuff like that. So, look, it's a small story from lockdown, but it has, I think, changed and impacted lives in ways that, I don't know, very few things in our country's present will be able to kind of, put up against this kind of magnitude. It's unfathomable.
We've never had anything like
unfathomable.
No.
The last thing of this scale was probably the Second World War in terms of its effect on every single person in the country and in the
it always
world.
happens somewhere else to someone else on the news, doesn't it? It doesn't ever happen here.
Yeah.
If you will, the scale of the incompetence, as it's, there's a great article that, and I suppose he's been thrown under the bus quite a lot, but it was really interesting what Professor Ferguson, who was the one that came up, he gets called Professor Lockdown. He was the one, he led the imperial study that modelled what would happen if you don't do anything.
Oh, this is what's widely credited with changing their minds.
Yeah, or partly changing the minds. Now, like Matt and I can talk about models, but generally they don't. People don't really necessarily understand that models are just that. They're like a scale model. They're not exactly reality. They just represent reality. So, like a little model tank represents a tank. It is not a tank, but it does represent it. So you can sort of get an idea what a tank is and what it might do. But a mathematical model, which is what epidemiologists work with, they model disease, and if you like, it's the population of a disease. And this is what this model was talking about with the information they had at hand. Now, obviously, the various factors influence the spread, and we're understanding what influences the spread and who's the most susceptible and what have you. But it was this model, which I think was published 13th March or something like that, 16th of March. Obviously, the information in that was presented to the government earlier, and it was really interesting in this article about how the advisory group actually gets the information to the Prime Minister and the decision makers. But what he did say was they were probably one of the most informed governments in the world, in Europe anyway, because 24th of January, France reports 3 novel coronavirus cases, the first reported in Europe. 27th of January, Germany reports its first confirmed COVID case. 30th January, this is really important, there are now 98 confirmed cases, no deaths yet reported, in 18 countries outside of China. 4 countries with 8 cases had evidence of person-to-person transmission. Up to this point, 30th of January, it hadn't even been confirmed whether it was transmitting person to person. Now, there is something called the International Health Response, and there was this emergency committee, and they can issue something called declare a public health emergency of international concern, which is basically calling a disease a pandemic. Since it had started in 2005, this was the 6th time it had been used. So that's 30th of Jan. Throughout February, the WHO were basically saying, this is serious. People prepare. You've got, I think on the 12th of February, it was saying, we've got time. You've still got time. On the 11th of February, coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 got called COVID-19, and by the 12th of February, there had already been 3 confirmed cases in the UK. By the 15th of February, there were 9 confirmed cases, and by the end of February, there were 23 confirmed cases. And, by what have we got? Interestingly, by the 10th of March, part of the government, a health minister, Nadine Dorries, tests positive for COVID. So the numbers are increasing, and it takes until the 12th of March. I can't believe this, that the UK Chief Medical Officer raises the risk to the UK from COVID from moderate to high. Incidentally, at this point, on the 11th of March, because of the alarming level of inaction, the WHO officially declares COVID-19 a global pandemic. By this point, Ireland had already cancelled St. Patrick's Day. There were no large gatherings happening in France, yet rugby matches, Atletico Madrid and Cheltenham all happen in the UK.
And you can still go see the Stereophonics.
And you can still go and see Stereophonics.
Yeah. Well, no, this is ridiculous because at this point, Boris was doing pretty much nothing, and at the same time, Wales was underwater. That everyone always forgets about the flooding that was happening, in February at the same time. He was doing
Yorkshire.
Fuck all about as well.
So he missed the Cobra meetings for the flooding, but then goes up to see the flooding, and this is all happening in February.
He missed them. He elected
Just didn't
not to go to them.
Yeah, exactly.
And then he missed 5 of these emergency meetings regarding COVID, and it takes until basically a panic, well, not a panic, but just like a stark model of what's going to happen. And this is the second one, because Exeter University had already published one, to actually go, yeah, we should be doing something. And that's on the 23rd of March. And if you really want to know, and a really interesting thing of how quickly this virus went around the world, from Wuhan to Mexico in little over a month, there's a really interesting genetic study that went saying a Mexican traveller to Italy was diagnosed on the 28th of Feb, had got back to Mexico with it, in picking up in Italy. The person who got it from in Italy had picked it up from Germany on the 27th of Jan, because they worked for a company in Munich where an employee there had contracted it from a Chinese colleague in Shanghai who had recently had a visit from their parents from Wuhan. So it literally goes from Wuhan, Shanghai, Munich, Italy, Mexico in little over a month.
I remember that you say that we did nothing till the 23rd of March. I remember I went away at the beginning of March. We just went to Swanage, and Swanage is tiny, and every shop you went in, it's all everyone was talking about even then. And that was right at the beginning of March. You went in Boots. I couldn't buy any soap because everyone was already buying soap at that point. So if everyone is aware of all this, the government just massively cocked up, reacted. They were reactive rather than proactive.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, I will hold our hand up. We took the decision to travel down. It was our son's birthday on the 12th of March.
Yeah, but you're not doing anything wrong.
No, but we did travel. We traveled down to St Albans because my gran shares a birthday with him. We don't know how long she's going to be around, and it turns out actually it was really important that we go down because we're now not going to see our family until maybe December if we're lucky. So that's a long period of time, and we seriously thought about it because we knew what the numbers were down south. We knew that Scotland, though had small numbers, it could easily probably spread over here. And we knew airports were choke points. A little bit of knowledge does help. It can be a dangerous thing, but it can also help. You go, well, what is the actual risk. And as far as we could tell, we were probably, in our family, 3 of us, I'm the most at risk. And the other 2 are not. But my parents obviously are as well. And we thought, well, we did it and we were okay. But, you know, it's that.
Yeah, but it's not. It wasn't up to individuals to make that sort of decision.
No,
It shouldn't have been.
There was no
Central
guidance. That's the
leadership.
problem.
But this was it, even before like lockdown, the flight we took back from Luton on the 16th or whatever it was, Monday, was only a third full, which already tells you that people were actually beginning to lock down even before the government told them to lock down. So it was like people would have actually responded if they'd locked down earlier.
And a lot of flights were cancelled. Like there was no one flying to Poland. Poland had already by then sort of locked down. You know, obviously Spain had locked down as well by that point. So it was just a delay. There was mixed messages coming out, and it was that lack of clarity.
So I remember
this. Sorry, there's this thing about there's a sort of difference between your individual risk and what the whole population has to do to affect a change. So it's I mean, it's pretty sensible to think, as you're talking about, well, we might carry it to our grandparents, or they might give it, you know, whatever. That's all really sensible. But the other thing is, unless everybody prevents transmission from around the population, then we keep having cases, and the cases mean that affects our economy and everything else. So you kind of need to wear a mask and maintain social distances, even if you never get COVID-19. And you don't have it because it's only by everybody obeying the rule that you get the whole population starts to really dampen the virus down.
I don't know whether to jump in here and just say, well, you know, if there is a vaccine that's ever produced, what are we going to do about the anti-vaxxers? Because they're also going to ruin the party potentially.
There was a survey, wasn't there, that said that 50% of people wouldn't take the vaccine.
I can't believe it's that high. I mean, I sincerely hope it's not that high, but
that question was a bit odd because it wasn't definite. Yeah, it was definitely take it, and I'm not sure I would even take that. But so I have faith in the scientific method and in scientists to produce this stuff, and they said it was working well. I would have it. I would have it. My children have it. Got no problem with vaccines, but I would want to think about it if it was. Like I wouldn't just like there's this one they produced in Russia. I'm not sticking that in my arm.
Yeah, I think you need to see how that question was worded.
Yeah, and I thought it was definitely. I'm not sure.
My source says there's already a drug that cures it. It's just a shame you can't get it through the post there at the moment.
Thing is, what about the developing world and so on? Because they're going to need it too. So if it's just for the developed world, but it's not being made available in the developing world, do you want to take it, or do you want to stand in sort of solidarity? What if there's a movement that says we're not taking this until you ensure that everyone's going to get it? Maybe you would say, actually, I want to wait till I want my government to ensure that we're getting it and we're contributing to everybody else getting it as well. So it's I think it's potentially more complicated.
It seems to be there's been a rush of powerful governments trying to secure doses of vaccines that don't actually exist yet. But secure it for themselves, and it won't work like that. If you can't just vaccinate your country unless you seal it off entirely from the rest of the world.
Well, it doesn't seal you off from economic harm even, does it? I mean, if your markets are all in permanent lockdown, you're never going to sell anything. So you've got to make the whole world healthy.
Something that this has really highlighted is the ridiculous degree to which the entire world is interconnected on an economic level. You can't just, the UK are so dependent on international trade of goods and services that even if we did just make sure everyone in the UK is absolutely fine,
but
the economy
Russ,
won't recover.
I'm going to
as well.
counteract your point though with Brexit means Brexit.
Yeah.
Sorry, Russ.
Yeah, and everyone that was working in industries that have collapsed can just go and pick strawberries all year.
Yeah, there you go. That's how it works, definitely.
Do you know what I miss though?
Olympics. We were saying that earlier.
No, not that. No, it was.
Yeah.
Saw some limpets today.
Of course you did.
Olympics. Emily Sandé belting out a few tunes.
Beautiful.
You will not let that go, will you?
He did like 3 fucking songs.
He's been on about this since 2012.
Like it was just weirdly just out of proportion.
Everyone enjoyed the Olympics opening ceremony. You were the only person sitting there going, fucking Emily Sandé again?
Emily Sandé did 3 songs. Paul fucking McCartney was there, and Emily Sandé's the one that does 3 songs. That's weird.
I know, and they even let Kenneth Branagh, lipless Kenneth Branagh, they even let him do a soliloquy at the beginning, didn't they? Which was mental. But I was going to say, the thing I miss most, like, is I was. It sounds really weird to even sort of say it these days, but I was always quite tactile, like with my colleagues and my friends and stuff like that. You know, hand on the shoulder and stuff like that. You know, we're all huggers at the office and things like that. I miss that. It's really very strange. Like I find it really hard to adjust to that because, you know,
it is weird, isn't it? It's the whole sort of
you can't really
level
even
of
be a
social
source
interaction.
you can't be a source of comfort in, you know, there are people. I'm like someone like me. Like if one of my colleagues is having a stressful day, I would walk up, you know, hand on the shoulder, you know, drink a cup of coffee or something like that, you know. Whereas now you just kind of have to get into their line of sight and be kind of like,
Tom's been spoken to a lot.
Right? Do you want to? but the point is, like, you can't even say I'm a tactile person without that reaction, without the humour, and then people going, Barbie, you're not supposed to do that. And it's like, I know, but you know, it's like, how do you comfort people these days?
There's something about that 2 meters as well, isn't it? Because there's like people's personal space, which depending on how well you know them, you go into or not, and then there's this like the space where you're in socially when you're talking to somebody that says, you know, I'm interested in talking to you, and then there's that further distance, which is just like, I don't trust you, or one of us has an injunction or something.
It's a very difficult distance for any sort of, like, you can't have a conversation 2 meters away from somebody. You're too far away. You don't pick up on facial cues and responses. You have to raise your voice to an uncomfortable level. You can't walk and talk with somebody because a pavement isn't 2 meters wide or a path. It's very difficult to maintain.
So wrong, isn't it?
In my office, we have
I think you'll find
ventilated, soundproofed. It's almost like hermetic meeting rooms now. It's just, it's bizarre. Like you walk into them and they are just dead spaces with, and all you can hear is the hum of ventilation. For people to have these, it's just
so bleak.
It's so weird, man. I don't know. It's the family atmosphere is literally gone in the office now. There is no buzz.
Stormtroopers would be all right because do they have little speakers?
No, so we do hear that their masks only filter out dust and smoke, not toxins.
Really, is that a thing?
That is a thing that's established when Finn and Rey are gonna like vent gas into the Falcon because they think stormtroopers are coming in. And you know, a viral particle is smaller than a.
They wear like a black kind of, you know, sort of skin tight suit that only goes up to about here, and then the helmet goes on, and it makes.
But is it little
it'd be better than walking around
got?
With nothing on, but they are breathing the atmosphere of where they are. They don't have an oxygen supply. It's not a sealed suit.
Can I interrupt with a listener question?
Something that I knew about.
Can I interrupt with a listener question? Like, so we've got a couple.
I think we've got a listener question. Dan.
Thanks. Seamless. Yeah. So this is from.
Is it about stormtroopers?
It's not about stormtroopers, but it's kind of related to what we're talking about. He has said, related to movies, do you find it weird watching films where everyone isn't socially distancing?
Yeah, definitely.
And will we see COVID precautions in films to normalise it?
Don't know about films. It's popping up on TV,
scientists,
isn't it? In like Coronation
Street
and that.
The soaps are doing it, aren't they? Soaps are all filming it.
I would have thought films necessarily because it's just not very interesting.
No, unless you make it the reason to make the film, like the David Tennant one you were talking about, Duncan, for example.
Oh, we watched that. I mean, that was magnificent.
Yeah.
What was it called?
You know, David Tennant, Michael Sheen.
What was it called?
Oh, not a film.
TV series. Yeah.
Damn
blank.
It's got like a one-word title, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Look it up. It's really good.
Oh, was it script?
It's amazing. Yeah.
It was hilarious. It was one of the best
What was also
things.
really weird is how much like a film some of real life looks at the moment. Like we had to go and get tested, which meant driving to a desolate, sealed-off airport car park with army vans and tents everywhere and like plastic screens and things. And it was very 28 days later. It was really strange.
I went to Watford Hospital and it was like that, but like it wasn't open, so it was even more like that. So like it was closed and it was this big empty car park with the big like tents and stuff. Yeah.
I had
Well-
I had a tooth extracted during lockdown, which was one of the weirder experiences when it, because I was told to wait outside the car park.
They
I
tied
was
a
the
bit of
only
string to it.
person. I was the only person allowed into the entire surgery. I basically was sort of put in front of a Perspex box, asked to remove any personal items that I wanted them to look after while I was undergoing the extraction. And I mean, I was in and out in about 10 to 15 minutes. There were no airs and graces during this. They literally wanted me in and out as fast as possible. It was the fastest, and they've obviously dosed me up with a fuckload of drugs because they didn't want me to be in there for very long. They were like, just keep injecting him until he literally can't feel his brain thinking, and now we'll just pop that bad boy out. It was very strange, very, very quiet, and no one wanted to talk either. I was like, oh, so how are you guys coping? They were like,
That's probably because you would just go, oh, and they couldn't understand you.
no, they could understand every word I enunciate perfectly.
I
even
choose my
while
words
Novocaine
very
off my
carefully.
tits.
Answering the question, is it weird?
Yeah.
It's not weird for watching like films and TV series necessarily. It's more weird watching aspects when you accidentally stumble across reality TV or like something like Bargain Hunt
Yes.
and stuff, and
Just
that's
seeing
when it's
people being
really
normal.
weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's when it's more weird rather than films. Though a lot of this
When
has
they're
felt like a
showing all
film.
the Glastonbury highlights and things, it just makes your skin crawl. The idea
I
of
was
being
just
in
about
that
to
big
say
a
that.
crowd.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
speaking of people that get in other people's personal space, David Dickinson's not going to have any work ever again, is he? Because he usually gets right into people.
Tom,
What have you got there? It's like
Tom,
proper.
I've got a horrible feeling he definitely won't be getting in anyone's space.
Well, what's happened
He's
to David
dead. He's
Dickinson?
dead, isn't he? No.
David
Have I
Dickinson.
got that one wrong? I got that one
Let's
wrong.
check
Ignore
the
me, but
internet.
I'm not a source of information.
So I had to take a job as a pizza delivery driver, and during peak lockdown, driving around.
David Dickinson is not dead.
Oops, sorry.
News for everyone. We'll start doing a David Dickinson
What's
check.
the take-home message on this podcast? David
Oh,
Dickinson is not
There is
dead.
none.
There is no take home. Yeah, driving around, it was really kind of 28 days later. It was that real
I missed that
post-apocalyptic.
when the roads are really empty.
Yeah, that's great.
It was so quiet. I mean, that was the thing. I mean, even here, like you couldn't hear. We got the AA14 not far from us, and now it's noisy again at night. But
And there were barely any aircraft either. I mean, there's definitely fewer
Yeah.
now. It
I
was,
say one of my favourite experiences of lockdown was we did a shoot down in central London, actually. Well, sort of north-south London, over the river, if you know what I mean. And
this
I
wasn't for your OnlyFans, was it?
no, this was a work. It was work. Damn it!
Oh, the other work.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it was work.
Well,
And we, myself and one of my other colleagues, drove 2 commercial vehicles down in through central London. Now, I mean, it's the kind of journey that in any other situation no one would ever want to make. But it was one of the most effort-free, fantastic drives through central London I've ever had. And of course, because the sat-nav's most direct route is actually past all of the things that you would love to be able to drive past, like Buckingham Palace and Marble Arch and all these beautiful things that you usually avoid. We were just, effortlessly coasting past these wonderful landmarks in London, going down into the tunnels and over the bridges, and it was just phenomenal. It was a wonderful thing to be able to do. So I will miss that when everything eventually chokes up again.
it already has. Like my journey to work used to be like 45 minutes, and now my journey to work is closer to like an hour and 5, and then eventually it'll become like an hour and 15, and then eventually it'll become an hour and a half.
Yeah.
We've got another question, by the way, if anyone's interested.
I've
Okay.
just been told we have another question.
We
Dan,
do.
We
Dan,
probably
what's the
better wrap
question?
it
There
up
we go.
after that.
Yeah. So this is from regular listener Nicola. She says she works in a primary school and wondering how dangerous it actually is for all the kids to be back in school since there isn't room to socially distance properly and masks aren't required.
Well, children just cannot
Wow.
socially distance.
No,
That-
they can't.
That might be a
We-
question that is out of the scope of our ability to answer in a definitive
We
way.
kind of did look into this.
Mm.
It is kind of complicated, and it's not that younger children aren't susceptible. They are, but they don't necessarily carry the viral loads to necessarily be key transmission. They're not necessarily the best at transmitting it. There isn't enough evidence to suggest that they don't, but, and this is what everyone's been really careful of, but under 10s especially are kind of, they might be. I mean, it's really not clear, but
well, it's notoriously difficult to conduct experiments on children with deadly viruses. That does tend to fail.
I have a paper right in front of me right now, which is from a pretty respectable journal, actually, where they took swabs from the nose of kids who had COVID, and actually looked to see what the kind of viral load was, and they figured out that actually kids under 10 don't have the same density of the receptors the virus binds to as kids over 10, which means that they're never going to have the same amount of virus in their nose that older kids would have. So it means they're less likely to pass it on to somebody else. And also it means they're less likely to be seriously ill with the virus.
Less likely, but not definitely won't.
Yeah, no, it means they will still be infected with it. It might just mean that kids under 10 are more likely to be symptomatic or mildly suffer from it. It doesn't mean they're any less likely, not to get it in the first place. It's just that they're less likely to have a
large number of viruses. The key thing, what was really interesting is that actually children, especially children under 10 but under 18, are really underrepresented in terms of illness. It's one of the clearest things, like across a lot of populations. In Iceland did okay, so it's not necessarily the most represented, but it's in terms of a model, because it's such a closed population, you do get quite an interesting picture that actually no under 10s, when they just did a survey and they managed to survey 6% of the population, no under 10s in the wider population showed up with being positive for COVID. So that was admittedly the PCR, the genetics, not the necessarily the antibody stuff. So we're not experts. I'm not going to say they're not going to get it, and none of us would say that. But there is some indication that they will get it, but they might not spread it.
The other thing I guess you've got to think about is not just like the thing itself, but the system around it. That's often a thing to think about. So how does the behaviour of adults change when they're dropping children off? Is there a danger of them getting close to each other at a higher frequency?
This is one of the big problems. A school is not just a sealed box with children in it. It also has a whole system of staff, and those staff have families and other contacts. And
I think the major point is that actually pubs are worse.
Yeah,
they've opened something already, which is far worse than opening schools.
That's the key thing. The people most at risk are more likely to be attending a pub rather than see okay, so you can see your grandchildren, and the children could pass it on to the grandparents. That is a risk. But the bigger risk is adults mingling under a roof.
Yeah.
And they will have a higher viral load. And viral load is really key to determining how severe something is. So I know we've gone on and we do need to wrap up, but schools
that is true about pubs being worse. But on the other hand, since March, Boris Johnson has been utterly desperate to go on telly and tell everyone that they can go back to the pub. So
swings and roundabouts.
I love that he just
people may drop their kids off at school and then go to the pub. It's possible. You don't know. Once you free people from childcare, you don't know what they're going to do. Even away from the school itself.
So we're laughing because we went out for dinner on Wednesday and had. So we are those parents.
I think, but Boris Johnson's occasional I want to tell people everything's going back to normal. Like the people that are shielding, you can just go out now. That's fine. Really? That's fine then. Yeah. Why not? Get them out there.
But children can't, under 10s especially, won't ever socially distant. You can't tell an 18-month-old to socially distant because they can't string a bloody sentence together. So
Well, I mean, they can, but
Blah, 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 blah. Car.
But it's the way. What's annoying me is the way that people are talking about opening schools is like
Mm.
the biggest risk ever. And it's like, no, you've already done things which are
yeah.
potentially even worse than opening schools.
I think it's like gyms. Oh, you can now go and work out and build up a sweat and flick your
Breathe.
sweaty hair around and potentially contaminate all of the
And-
dumbbells and the instruments and the machinery. And
Yeah,
the
but
treadmills.
breathe
on
really
the other hand with
heavily.
that, it'll keep the fucking joggers off the pavements and trap them in a room with other joggers, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, what? No, it's not. It's not just keeping joggers off the pavement. I encountered a jogger running on the road,
Yeah.
even though the pavement was completely clear, and I thought to myself, I think we're getting a bit comfortable.
This is
with
their
empty
apocalypse,
roads here.
Tom, and
Yeah,
we're just taking parts in it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely. It's Well, I've seen some weird stuff in St Albans anyway. I've seen someone on inline skates, just going down the road, the hill of like Blue House Hill, like with just this line of traffic behind them. They're like, because he's going quite quickly, but at the same time, no one wants to try and overtake him because they don't want to kill him.
was he by any chance
Like
singing?
it's-
Was he singing "Woe Body Form" at an annoyingly loud volume as well?
No,
I used to cycle down Hollywell Hill.
no, this guy's on inline skates.
Oh, right.
Oh man, I want to dust off my inline skates. Like, there we
She
go.
backs it up by saying, "I'm in Yorkshire. Guarantee the parents." Yeah, anyway, yeah, cool. Anyway.
I mean, there is one other thing about opening schools and childcare. If you really want to get the economy going again, you kind of got to think about childcare because a significant proportion of that population kind of got children, kind of got
Yeah,
to keep them
and
sane.
we don't live in a country where childcare is particularly affordable or well supported by the government, and a huge amount of it is done by grandparents, which obviously, if everything's fine, the government is
Although I would
perfectly
s-
happy just to let that situation tick on because it suits them, but it's now looking like something of a problem.
There are, I mean, there's a few members of my family who work in childcare, specifically at nurseries, who've been open through the entire outbreak, looking after the children of key workers. So I don't know, potentially the government has a semi-trained collection of professionals who might be in a position to, I don't know whether they're going to they could nationalize these kind of operations and open them up to more people to open up the economy. Who knows? I mean, that's the point, isn't it? It's you just don't know what lengths and measures.
Then would you want to
Actually-
send your children to a school run by Dominic Cummings? Be like
Fuck no.
a re-education camp, wouldn't it?
I think that's actually a good point though, Tom, because there have actually been a significant number of children who have still been in nurseries throughout this.
Or even schools.
It's not like, and even schools, it's not like every single child has not been in an education setting.
Yeah, that's
throughout
right.
this. So that also kind of adds to the whole thing of, well, what's wrong with going back to school, really?
Yeah, I mean, look, I know we probably need to wrap up, but there is that one thing that always plagues my mind at the moment, which is the psychological impact on children actually during a time like this. It's very, very strange, very weird. For Vinny, my little boy, it might not necessarily be as big a deal because he had 6 months of school and now he's had a bit of time off. Whereas for children who might be in their second or third year of school, this represents a bigger impact on their mental health. And I know that this is a bigger topic, a bigger part of it.
It'll
But
be huge and different. I mean, like just look at the A-levels nonsense and the
I was about to say
GCSEs
that's
about to come
the
out. It's going to be
shining example, isn't it?
everyone
exactly.
who you
Yeah.
could possibly call a child, from babies to 18-year-olds. This is going to have a colossal impact on him one way or another. I mean, Fife's 3, and it's had a huge impact on him. He's struggled to understand it. He's not being able to see people. He's missed people. He's not been able to do things that he likes doing. It's really difficult, and it's going to be difficult in different ways for every age group of child. I mean, and
so
adult,
what are they
really.
going to call them? Because we've had millennials, we've had Gen Z, so potentially Gen C is on the horizon. I mean, this is
I saw a
defining
T-shirt that said
moment in their life.
I saw a T-shirt that said Gen Algorithm.
Yeah. Yeah. If they were going to start labeling the generations, they really shouldn't have started with X, should they?
No.
It doesn't give you much room to go.
Well, we know that anyone conceived.
Just like number plates, they'll just start another numbering system a bit further
I don't know
down.
what we used to be millennials, but we're not anymore.
Are we
No,
not?
we're millennials.
We are still millennials.
But-
But
no,
we're
actually,
millennials
when
until we
people talk
die.
about millennials,
Yeah.
they're not talking about us. But we were originally called millennials because we turned 18 in the year 2000.
Russ, we were there for the release of the WTK album, the Will Smith album, Willennium.
Yeah.
So we're millennials.
No, they're when
actually.
people talk about millennials, they're talking about Gen Z. They're
Yeah.
not talking about but they are. I mean, if they're using the term millennials, they are technically as a marketeer, we are millennials.
Yeah.
We're
I'll
on
happily
the
sneak.
culture,
I'll
we're
happily
not.
sneak into Gen X though. Gen X was quite cool.
No, we miss Gen X.
Oh no.
And we totally missed it.
My cousin's Gen X because he's 1979. But
Yeah, that's fine.
I've got a very important question, and this might round it out.
We're going to
so
have
you're
to
saying-
chip off after this.
You're saying fecal matter. We've had this discussion before. Cannot be transferred through fecal matter now.
Do you just
Right.
need this sort of reassurance, Dan?
Yeah, I'm
We
just going to get my
will-
notebook. Yep.
We're going to do this as a two-parter. I
Okay.
was reading a full review of everything about COVID,
Yeah.
and though it is found in fecal matter, there is no case of fecal to oral transmission. However, I will hand it over to Emma to explain more.
Sorry, Emma.
No, if you were just no, I'm not explaining more about fecal to oral transmission. But I'm just saying that the reason it's detected in the fecal matter is because there are the same, what they're calling ACE2 receptors the virus binds to. You get them expressed in your digestive tract, which is why you get some of it in fecal matter. However, it's very hard for the virus to get there physically rather than the lungs. The lungs are easy to get to. So by the time it's actually got all the way through your digestive tract, it's the viral load is not big enough, Dan, so I wouldn't worry.
I think
Awesome.
that's quite reassuring because it does mean that if you accidentally sit in a puddle of COVID-19, even if it soaks through your trousers, you're all right.
Unless you try and drink it, then
Flash.
it's COVID-19. Don't smell, don't sit in it
Smell
and
it.
then smell it.
No.
Because no.
Dan,
No.
does that reassure you?
Rimming, all good. Yep.
You can continue eating ass.
Excellent. Well, on that note, I think it's probably time for us to wrap this exciting episode down. I have to admit, finding a lot of the stuff that you guys were talking about incredibly interesting. Like you said at the very beginning, this was all your opinions and stuff like that, but I think it is obviously very clearly grounded in understanding way beyond the comprehension of, especially people like me and Dan. I think Russ held his own in that. I think he asked some really good questions. I don't know whether he prepared them before, but he came across certainly as the more intelligent of the less intelligent people on this podcast.
I've just watched enough movies to know these sort of things.
Yeah, Dustin Hoffman, man, best teacher ever. I'm walking here. Anyway, so thanks very much for watching. If you're on YouTube, thank you for watching, streamers. Thank you for your questions. If you're listening on the podcast as well, thank you very much for downloading or listening live on SoundCloud or whatever streaming platform you were on. If you want to interact with us on any of our social media feeds, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, all under the same handle, @TMTOOH. Our sister pod, Theatrical Cut, is still there, and you can hit them up on Facebook and Instagram if you want to, at Theatrical Cut Pod. I'm going to say thank you very much for the three people who joined us in different guises. Duncan, obviously, in his guise as Dr. Dunk. His wife, Emma, in the guise of Dr. B. Matt, in his guise as Dr. Matt. I'm going to say goodbye to Russ.
Cheerio.
I'm going to say goodbye to Dan.
Still against it. I'm sticking with that.
We're going to say,
Yeah.
strong one. We're going to say goodbye to Emma. We're going to say goodbye to Matt.
Bye.
We're going to say goodbye to Dunk.
That's 2020.
And it's goodbye from me, Tom. And on that note, let's cue the music.